It is the 28th of June, 1914, a Sunday morning in Sarajevo. A man stands on a street corner with a bomb hidden under his coat. He has been waiting for hours, shifting his weight from foot to foot, trying to look like he belongs there. He is 19 years old. In his pocket there is a small glass vial of poison, in case things go wrong, in case he is caught, in case dying quickly becomes preferable to whatever comes after. 6 other men are positioned along the same road, spaced out at careful intervals, each one waiting for the same car, each one armed, each one prepared to die today if it means the car does not reach its destination. At 10:15, the car appears. Inside it sits a man and his wife, sitting close together in the open summer air, his hand near hers, both of them waving at the crowds lining the street. It is warm. The sun is high. People are cheering, genuinely cheering, leaning out of windows and pressing against the barriers for a glimpse of the visiting Archduke and his wife. It is, by every outward appearance, a perfect summer morning for a royal visit. It is also their wedding anniversary. 14 years married, on this exact date, in this exact place, surrounded by people who do not know what 14 years of fighting it took for either of them to be sitting in that car together at all. One of the men along the road steps forward. He raises his arm. He throws something small and dark toward the moving car. It strikes the folded back of the vehicle and bounces away. For one full second, nothing happens. The crowd does not understand what they just saw. The driver does not yet know to be afraid. Then the device explodes in the street behind them, a flat, violent crack that sends smoke and metal fragments tearing through the crowd, wounding bystanders, throwing one of the trailing cars half off the road. The car carrying the man and his wife speeds away, untouched, swerving hard around the wreckage and the screaming. They arrive at the town hall minutes later, pale, badly shaken, but alive. The mayor steps forward to give his planned welcome speech, the one he has clearly rehearsed for weeks, full of warm, careful, ceremonial language about the great honor of their visit to this city. The husband cuts him off mid-sentence. He is furious, and for once he does not bother to hide it behind royal composure. He wants to know how a city that just tried to kill him can still stand there and read him a speech about hospitality, as though nothing at all has happened, as though he did not just watch a bomb explode behind his own car. His wife leans toward him, quietly. She says something only he can hear, something steadying, something that only a wife of 14 years would know exactly how to say. He stops, he breathes, he nods at the mayor to continue. They do not know yet that the mourning is not over. They do not know that within the hour, every safeguard meant to protect them will fail in the most ordinary, almost absurd way possible. A wrong turn taken by a driver who was never told the route had changed. A car that slows to reverse at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong street. A thin, sickly 19-year-old who had already given up on the plan, who had already started walking away to buy himself something to eat, who happens to look up and find the car stopped 5 feet in front of him. They do not know that this single Sunday morning, this anniversary, will not just end 2 lives. It will end an empire that had stood for centuries. It will drag a continent that did not yet know it was standing on the edge of catastrophe into a war so large, it would eventually need a new word invented just to describe its scale. This is the story of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, not just how the world remembers them dying, but who they actually were, what they had to fight to be allowed to love each other at all, and what that love ultimately cost them both. Go back 26 years, to the late summer of 1888, to a crowded ballroom in Prague. The room is loud with orchestra music and the rustle of formal dresses. Candlelight catches on jewelry and gold braid. It is exactly the kind of evening Franz Ferdinand has attended 100 times before and found tedious every single one of them. He is 24 years old, an Austrian Archduke, nephew to the reigning emperor, already, quietly, third in line to inherit the largest empire in Europe outside of Russia, a sprawling, multilingual, restless territory stretching across more than a dozen nationalities. He is tall, serious, and known in court circles as somewhat stiff and difficult to read. Those who actually know him privately describe someone different entirely. Someone who prefers the quiet of a hunting lodge to a crowded ballroom. Someone who collects art and antiques with genuine, careful passion. Someone who is, underneath the formality, lonelier than his position would suggest. Across the room that evening, he notices a young woman. Her name is Sophie Chodek. She is not the daughter of a reigning monarch, not a princess, not anyone the court would consider a serious candidate for his attention. Her family is minor Bohemian nobility, respected enough to place her as a lady-in-waiting to an archduchess, but nowhere near grand enough to be considered equal to a future emperor. She is calm in a way that strikes him immediately. She does not flatter him. She does not perform for him the way so many women at court have learned to perform around powerful men. When he speaks to her, she actually listens, and when she answers, she says exactly what she thinks rather than what she assumes he wants to hear. He finds himself, for the first time in longer than he can remember, genuinely wanting to stay in a conversation rather than searching for a polite way out of it. They begin to find reasons to be in the same rooms. At first it looks like nothing more than coincidence. Then it starts to look, to anyone paying close attention, like something else entirely. For a man in his position, falling in love is not really treated as a private matter. A future emperor's marriage is, first and foremost, a political instrument. It exists to secure alliances, to strengthen bloodlines, to bind one royal house to another. Tradition demands he marry someone from one of Europe's reigning or formerly reigning dynasties, someone whose name alone reinforces the empire's legitimacy. Sophie's family, for all its respectability, simply does not qualify, not by a significant margin. So Ferdinand does something almost nobody in his position would dare to do. He keeps it secret, not for weeks, not for months. For over 2 years, he and Sophie conduct their entire relationship in careful, deliberate privacy, exchanging letters, finding rare and quiet moments together, both of them fully aware of exactly how dangerous discovery would be to whatever future they might still have. When people at court begin to notice that he is visiting a certain Archduke's household with unusual regularity, they draw the obvious conclusion. They assume he has finally taken an interest in one of that Archduke's own daughters, eligible royal women, exactly the kind he is expected to marry. He lets them believe it. It is easier for now than the truth. And the truth, if it surfaces too early, before he has any real plan for how to defend it, could end everything before it has the chance to properly begin. Eventually, inevitably, the truth does surface. And when it does, the household that employs Sophie reacts immediately and without mercy. The moment it becomes clear that Ferdinand has been visiting not for one of the eligible daughters but for the lady-in-waiting, Sophie is dismissed from her position that same day. No warning, no transition, simply removed. It is the court's way of making its position clear, before a single official word needs to be said. Emperor Franz Joseph, Ferdinand's uncle and the absolute ruler of the empire, is not merely unhappy. He is, by every account, deeply offended. A future emperor cannot simply marry whoever he wishes. The very structure of Habsburg legitimacy depends on careful, calculated unions between royal houses. To marry beneath that standard is, in the eyes of the court, to weaken the foundation the entire empire stands on. The pressure on Ferdinand to end things and move on to someone suitable is immediate, constant, and relentless. He does not move on. He loves Sophie completely, and as far as the historical record allows us to see, without a single recorded moment of real doubt. He is prepared to spend years, if necessary, fighting the entire machinery of the Habsburg court rather than give her up. And it does take years. The standoff drags on long enough that it becomes something close to a quiet European scandal. Eventually, other reigning monarchs across the continent, including figures with genuine diplomatic weight, begin gently applying their own pressure on Franz Joseph, suggesting that perhaps, given his nephew's complete and very public refusal to budge, some kind of compromise might finally be in order. Faced with a future emperor who will simply not relent, no matter how long the argument continues, Franz Joseph finally agrees. But only on one condition, and it is not a small one. The marriage will be morganatic. It is a particular kind of arrangement, almost cruel in its precision. Franz Ferdinand may keep his place in the line of succession. He may, one day, still become emperor, but Sophie herself can never become empress, no matter what title he holds. And whatever children they might have together, however many, will have absolutely no claim to the throne. Not now, not ever. The bloodline effectively ends with him as far as the crown is concerned. On the 28th of June, 1900, exactly 14 years before the morning we began with, Franz Ferdinand stands before the assembled court and formally signs the declaration. He swears it aloud, publicly, deliberately, in front of witnesses who will remember exactly what he gave up that day. His own children's future inheritance, surrendered, as the price of being allowed to marry the woman he has already spent more than a decade fighting for. 3 days later, on the 1st of July, 1900, they are finally married. It is a small ceremony by royal standards, almost deliberately modest, as though the court wants the wedding itself to reflect how little status it is willing to grant her. Only a handful of family members attend. There is no grand state occasion, no celebration befitting the marriage of a future emperor. Just a quiet room, a small group of witnesses, and two people who have waited over a decade for this exact moment. By the standards of his world, what Franz Ferdinand has just done is an extraordinary sacrifice. He has permanently altered the future of his own bloodline, given up something most men in his position would never even consider surrendering, simply to be allowed to stand beside this particular woman for the rest of his life. It will not, as it turns out, be the last sacrifice either of them makes for each other. Despite everything it cost to arrive there, their marriage is, by every surviving account from the people who actually knew them, genuinely and unusually happy. Within 4 years, they have 3 children, a daughter named Sophie after her mother, born in 1901, then 2 sons, Max, born in 1902, Ernst, born in 1904. Visitors to their private estate describe a household that feels almost shockingly ordinary for a family at this level of European aristocracy. Children running through the halls, a father who gets down on the floor to play with them rather than simply observing from a chair. A mother who is warm and physically affectionate in a way the rigid Habsburg court rarely allows itself to be. People who saw Franz Ferdinand only in his public role, stiff, serious, often visibly impatient with ceremony, would barely recognize the man his own children knew at home. But that public world refuses to let either of them forget the terms of their marriage, not for a single day in over a decade. At almost every official occasion, Sophie is required to wait. Strict court protocol dictates that she cannot enter a formal room until every woman who outranks her by birth, archduchesses, princesses, women whose only real qualification is the family they happen to be born into, has entered ahead of her. She stands outside doorways, sometimes for long, visible minutes, while her own husband waits inside for her to be allowed to join him. She cannot ride beside him in the official royal carriage at state functions. At formal banquets, she is seated according to her technically inferior rank, not as the wife of the man hosting the event, but as a guest of comparatively minor status. In the language of the court, she is simply not equal to him. No title, no number of years married, no amount of personal affection changes that fact in the eyes of Habsburg protocol. Franz Ferdinand watches this happen to the woman he loves again and again, year after year, and by every account it genuinely angers him. He cannot undo the agreement he himself signed. The terms were absolute, but there is one specific circumstance, one narrow exception in an otherwise rigid system, where the usual rules quietly loosen. When Franz Ferdinand travels in his official military capacity, specifically as Inspector General of the Empire's armed forces, rather than in a purely royal or ceremonial capacity, the strict rules of precedence relax slightly. In that particular context, on military business rather than court business, Sophie is permitted to appear at his side. She can ride beside him. She can be seen, however briefly, as something closer to his equal in public, for the length of whatever trip he happens to be making. In June of 1914, he is scheduled to travel to Bosnia to inspect imperial troops stationed there. He decides, without much hesitation, to bring her. It is one of the only circumstances in their entire married life where the world might finally see their marriage the way it actually exists behind closed doors. Not an archduke and a woman beneath him. Just a husband and a wife, side by side, the way it has always felt at home. And so, on the 28th of June, the 14th anniversary of the very day they were finally permitted to marry, Sophie travels with him to Sarajevo. She wanted to be there. Multiple accounts describe her actively requesting to accompany him on this particular trip, not simply accepting an invitation, but pushing, in her own quiet and deliberate way, for the right to stand beside her own husband in public, on their anniversary, in a role the Viennese court had spent 14 years denying her. That choice, made out of love and a kind of patient defiance, will cost her everything. The political backdrop to that particular morning in Sarajevo is heavier than either of them fully understands as they step off the train. Bosnia and Herzegovina had been formally annexed into the Austro-Hungarian Empire only 6 years earlier, in 1908, a move that infuriated Serbian nationalists who believed the territory rightfully belonged with Serbia rather than with Vienna. A secret nationalist organization, with quiet but real connections reaching into Serbia itself, has spent months planning to use Franz Ferdinand's official visit as an opportunity to strike directly at the empire they see as an occupying power. 6 young men, most of them barely out of adolescence, are positioned at careful intervals along the planned motorcade route that morning. Each one is armed. Several carry small glass vials of cyanide, fully intending to take their own lives the moment the attack is finished, rather than face capture. The first few simply fail to act when the moment arrives. One later admits he simply lost his nerve completely as the car passed. Another claims afterward that he felt too watched, too exposed, to risk pulling out his weapon in front of so many witnesses. The third man along the route does not fail. As the royal car passes his position, he steps forward and throws his device directly at it. It strikes the folded back section of the vehicle and bounces away instead of landing inside, exploding instead in the street behind them, wounding several bystanders and members of the entourage traveling in a following car. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, shaken but physically unharmed, are driven onward to the scheduled reception. The furious exchange with the mayor happens almost exactly as described at the very beginning of this story. Sophie, sitting close beside her husband, leans in and calms him with a few quiet words before he says something that cannot be walked back in front of the assembled officials. The reception, against every reasonable expectation, continues as planned. Afterward, his security advisors urge him, with genuine alarm in their voices, to abandon the rest of the day's schedule and leave the city immediately. There are more attackers along the route, they warn him. The earlier attack proves the threat is real, not theoretical. Continuing as planned is no longer simply risky. It is reckless. Franz Ferdinand has never liked heavy security surrounding him in public. He has said as much, more than once, in private. He waves off the warning now, the same way he has waved off similar warnings throughout his career. Instead, he insists on visiting the people wounded in that morning's grenade attack at the hospital to see them personally and apologize for what happened on his account. It is, by most descriptions, a genuinely decent impulse. It is also the decision that keeps them in the city for one more hour than they otherwise would have stayed. The motorcade sets off again, this time along an altered route specifically chosen to avoid the street where the earlier attack took place. Except nobody, actually, informs the lead driver of the change. The first car in the motorcade continues confidently down the originally planned road, the exact same road where the remaining conspirators are still standing, still waiting, several of them having already assumed by now that the entire plot has failed and the day is essentially over. Realizing the mistake only after it is too late to simply continue forward, someone in the car shouts for the driver to stop and reverse course. The car slows to a near halt directly in front of a small delicatessen on the corner. A thin, sickly 19-year-old, a university student with tuberculosis who had already mentally given up on the plan succeeding, who had already turned and started walking away to buy himself something to eat while he still had the chance, happens to be standing exactly there when the car stops. He looks up. The car carrying the Archduke, and his wife is less than 5 feet away from him. He has a pistol in his coat pocket. He steps forward. He fires twice, at point-blank range, before almost anyone standing nearby fully understands what is happening in front of them. The first bullet was never actually meant for either of them. It was aimed at a senior official seated in the same car, a man the assassins considered responsible for the territory's occupation. It misses him entirely. It tears into Sophie's abdomen instead. The second bullet strikes Ferdinand directly in the side of the throat. For a brief, almost surreal moment, very few people nearby grasp how serious the wounds actually are. Ferdinand remains sitting upright. There is, at first glance, surprisingly little visible blood. Then Sophie cries out and slumps sideways toward him. He turns to her immediately, panic breaking through his usual composure for the first time all day, asking urgently if she has been hurt. She does not answer him. He reaches for her, pulling her upright against him, holding her as the car accelerates hard toward the nearest available medical help, the governor's residence, only minutes away across the city. According to multiple accounts from those present in the car that day, his last words to her, repeated again and again as her body went still in his arms, were a desperate, simple plea, the words of a husband rather than an archduke. "Sophie, don't die. Sophie, don't die for the children." She is already gone by the time the car reaches the residence. He is carried inside moments later and placed on a chaise in a side room, still conscious for a short while, still in his full military uniform, still wearing the ceremonial medals from a reception that, less than an hour earlier, had simply been an ordinary formal visit to a city he had been reluctant to spend much time in at all. He dies only minutes after she does. The entire attack, from the instant the pistol was raised to the moment both of them were gone, lasts only a matter of seconds. Less time, in the end, than it took the mayor to deliver the welcome speech they had already survived once that morning. It is late now, wherever you are. What followed that single Sunday morning is, by now, one of the most repeated and most studied chains of events in modern history. Within weeks, the empire formally held an entire nation responsible for what one teenager with a pistol and a vial of poison had done alone, on a street corner, on impulse, after the actual plan had already seemingly failed. Alliances activated almost automatically, the way they had been designed to. Armies began to mobilize across the continent. By August, barely 6 weeks later, the whole of Europe found itself at war. A war that would eventually take the lives of millions of people who had never once heard the names Ferdinand or Sophie, who had no say whatsoever in any of the decisions that led them there. All of it, in some very real and very strange sense, traces directly back to a couple who simply wanted, for one day, to be seen standing beside each other as equals. A man who gave up his own children's inheritance for the right to marry the woman he loved, and never once seemed to regret it. A woman who spent 14 years being quietly told by an empire that she was not quite equal to her own husband, who finally, for one single trip, on one single anniversary, got to ride beside him in public exactly the way she always had at home. They had less than an hour left in the world when that car slowed down in the wrong street. Somewhere inside all of it, underneath the politics and the armies and the century of consequences that followed, there is one small, human, almost unbearable detail that the history books rarely have room for. Not an empire falling, not a war beginning, just a husband holding his wife in his arms, asking her quietly not to go. Please do like and subscribe.